Mad Catholic is created by ordinary people with deep faith and lots of questions, so we all can unbox our faith. Now, here's your host, Kelly Worth, and today's special guest, Kate Hennessy.
Our guest today has left a deep impression on my soul with her writing and her visual arts. She has encouraged me to think about the ties that bind us to family, especially our mothers and grandmothers, and how we wrestle with the feminine legacies we inherit. Kate Hennessy is a writer and artist who has been profoundly influenced by her early education at the knee of her mother, Tamar Hennessy, who was a devout craftswoman, gardener, and weaver. She also carries in her heart her grandmother, Dorothy Day, the well-known 20th century Catholic convert, social activist, writer, and co-founder of the Catholic worker movement, who has been elevated in the Roman Catholic Church to servant of God. Kate's travels to Africa, India, and Tibet, in addition to walking El Camino de Santiago, have formed in her a deep love for the earth and its denizens. Now, from her home in County Donegal in Ireland, she pursues the same beauty her mother inspired her to seek and see in nature. That same beauty her grandmother recognized, even in tormented souls and polluted beaches. Kate is interested in hospitality for both the wild and for people. She is particularly taken by the rewilding movement and hopes to be able to contribute in some way to bringing back the Irish rainforests. She is also a firm believer in the curative powers of a good talk and a cup of tea. Kate intends to move beyond her private studio and open a gathering space, preferably an old shop front with big windows and a squeaky wooden floor, in which like-minded people can come together to talk in good Catholic worker tradition, form a community, however loosely, and encourage one another in the work that we each are called to do, what is ours to do. Like her grandmother, Kate wrestles with complexity, easily dismissing none of the confusion and darkness of life, even as she recovers surprising colors and textures there. I first became aware of our guest through her fascinating biography, Dorothy Day, The World Will Be Saved by Beauty. As Day's youngest grandchild, she offers unique insights to how her granny's deep spirituality both enriched and challenged her family, the Roman Catholic Church, and global Catholic views of social justice and service. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Kelly. This is a delight.
I'm so grateful for our communication so far, which for me has been so enriching. And today, I couldn't be happier to bring you to our Mad Catholic guests. So thank you for being here. And you are in Ireland, correct?
Yes, I am. My husband and I have been living here for the past 5 years, though we've been here on and off since 1998. I've been coming to Ireland since 1983. Ireland holds a special place for me. I'm from Vermont, which is an extraordinarily beautiful place, and it certainly is where I was born and raised, and my roots belong there. But there's something about Ireland that just really speaks to me spiritually.
It's great when we can find that place in the world where our spirit connects. When I was reading your book, I was so struck, as I said in the introduction, by the impact of family and on spirituality, on everything. And I would love it if we could start out talking about family, particularly mothers. Would you speak about how your mother and your grandmother are present in and with you today, and how you still feel and know them?
That is a mighty question, Kelly. And where do I begin? They are definitely with me every day. I see the world through their lens, and it's a world of beauty, of pain and suffering, of difficulty, but of hope and joy and delight. And also just this sense of you never stop, you never give up, you keep on keeping on, no matter how difficult things are. But you also be wise. They were very practical people in their fantasies, their desires, because they both had big dreams. And these dreams in many ways did not come to fruition, but they never let that stop them.
That is interesting. I loved getting to know your mother in the book. Everyone hears about Dorothy, but now your mother, Tamar Teresa Baderham Hennessy, is
Well, Tamar Teresa
Tamar
Battram.
Batram. Thank you for
Battram.
correcting. Batram Hennessy. What was your mother's perception of the Catholic worker movement and her mother? Did she speak to you about that?
Oh boy, did she speak to me about it.
Yeah.
I grew up hearing my mother's stories of the Catholic worker and her time growing up within the Catholic worker. And also, after my grandmother died in 1980, my mother and I spent decades talking about Dorothy. My mother really had to move through a lot of things within herself. They had an incredibly close relationship. The main reason why I wrote the book is that when my mother and I were talking about her experiences with her mother and with the Catholic worker, I kept saying to my mother, you know, this is a fabulous story. You have to write your story. And she would say, oh, no, I'm not writing the story. And we went on that way for many years. It was my mother died in 2008. So after my mother died, I thought, if I don't write her story, everything that she told me, everything that was on her mind, everything that she learned, then a huge part of the Catholic worker history and the story of my grandmother as a mother would be lost. I know it's hard to believe now, but many people didn't even know that Dorothy was a mother, that it just wasn't
Yeah.
spoken about for
Yeah.
years. And to me, it was so important. I needed to get this story out to show people who my mother was and to show that this relationship between the two of them was incredibly deep and powerful and went through hell. There were some years that were really severe on both of them, but they came through and to come to a beautiful place towards the end of my grandmother's life in which it was just the two of them together. My mother caring for my grandmother, the last 3 years before my grandmother's death. So there was a real working through of a very difficult, complex, and deeply loving relationship.
I really got that from the book, and I guess that's why I love talking about your mother. I have some pictures here of your mother and grandmother together, and I think it's important, especially maybe now, that Dorothy has been elevated to servant of God status, that we don't gloss her up too much, and we don't gloss up your family too much.
I mean, we all fall short in our relationships with our family.
Yeah.
But my grandmother was heroic in her family relationships. And it's not only with my mother, but also with us. I was the only grandchild at whose birth she wasn't able to attend. And that was because I came too quickly. But all of my other siblings, all 8 of them, my grandmother was with my mother at the time of their birth. And then also my grandmother had siblings and nieces and nephews, and she was always visiting all of us. Of course, maybe that was because she was always fleeing the Catholic worker, getting away, needing a break, but only kept her family relations. She kept her friends too. She kept friends from way back in the early days, during periods in which she had communist friends, and she kept them. They were very loyal to her, and she was very loyal to them, even during the McCarthy era when people were so anti-communist. But to her, friendship and family, community were essential, and she never let that go.
So what I'm hearing is that although some people might think there is a dichotomy between service and family, in your family, you found a way to make it work. You found a way to pull that together.
Yeah, nothing is ever black and white, is it?
No.
My mother loved growing up in the Catholic Church. She absolutely loved it. And she would always say, I didn't know people behaved badly. I didn't know that people could not be good until I left the Catholic worker.
Wow.
She just grew up with this sense of the goodness of people. And then when we were growing up in Vermont, my siblings and I, we spent a lot of time at the Catholic Worker Farm in Tivoli, upstate New York. And so I had the Catholic worker during summer holidays and other holidays at a very formative time. And so I have these fond memories of the Catholic worker growing up. And that's what my mother wanted. That's why she made sure we went down to the farm.
Yeah.
So there's that element of this wonder and power. And it was really delightful, me as I was growing older, growing up, becoming more and more aware of who my grandmother was and what she spoke about and what she wrote about. I discovered she was a writer when I was 7 years old, and I was just amazed. I said, oh my God, she's a writer. And of course, that changed the trajectory of my life.
Right.
I was like, I'm going to be a writer too. Because I love stories. Who doesn't love stories? And what seven-year-old doesn't love stories? So there's this tremendous power. And two of my sisters met their husbands through the Catholic worker. Our lives, our history are interwoven with the Catholic worker history. And yet, it is very difficult in several ways. One is only one of my siblings is a practicing Catholic. My grandmother's faith has been very difficult for the family. My mother left the church in her 40s. I should rephrase that. It wasn't my grandmother's faith that affected my sibling. It was the Catholic Church that affected my siblings and my mother. My mother had 10 pregnancies, 9 births. She had a marriage that fell apart soon after I was born. I'm the youngest. And she got no support from her Catholic community when the marriage fell apart. Truthfully speaking, the Catholic Church's teachings on birth control and having large families destroyed my father. It destroyed my father. So there is this legacy within the church that it has been very hard for my family to understand. And yet we totally understand, most of us. I can't speak for all of us. It's a large family and we're very different.
Yeah.
We all have different experiences. We all have different memories of my grandmother. We all have different relationship with my mother and my grandmother. So I can't really speak for all of us, but I certainly have a very deep and abiding love for the Catholic worker, even as I know what difficulties my parents had. It was very hard to watch one's parents fall apart under the burden that Catholic teachings put them under.
I'm so glad you spoke of that, because that's one of the things that I'm most concerned about here with Mad Catholic. We have this beautiful church, this grand Catholicism, but then how does that impact individuals, families? And we need to wrestle out these hard questions about what is it to be Catholic? Is it following rules? Is it something else? And how do we allow people to exercise conscience in the context of all these expectations that, frankly, for many people are just impossible, either physically, whether it's for women or for fathers who are struggling. These are very important things. And it's no wonder that many people, and we talk about that a lot on this show too, it's no wonder that many people feel like, then I just can't be Catholic. And yet, there's no question that your mother continued to be the deeply good person, the deeply devoted mother. I get that from the book. Whether or not she felt like she could call herself Catholic, she was who she was, a woman of deep loyalty and love and faith. That's my impression from the book. And that's my impression from you today.
Absolutely. She discarded the paternalistic, moralistic rigidity of church teachings, and she held on to I guess you would call it the church beyond the church.
Yeah.
That the heart, she maintained the heart. And I can't emphasize the word hospitality in this discussion. It was the idea of hospitality, the requirement that we give hospitality was so essential to my mother. It was at her absolute core. And of course, that is at the core of the Catholic worker.
Yes.
And my Stanley Wisniewski, who I absolutely loved, one of the early Catholic workers who helped raise my mother and us and then the next generation, he would say the Catholic worker goes through various stages. but it always comes back to hospitality. There is no Catholic worker without hospitality. And my mother never, ever lost that. She had to, I mean, she was incredibly poor, but she was so generous and so hospitable. I mean, she gathered everyone to her, animals and people. Teenagers who've been kicked out of their homes. Parents didn't walk out. She just gathered so many people in her embrace. So I think what my point here is that, yes, she retained, I think, a core that to me represents the true church, a real sense of the holiness of all being. No creature was not cared for by her. No plant. She didn't believe in weeds. She wouldn't kill mice. She would feed the mice in her house.
I love this. Okay, so we've got St. Benedict's hospitality and St. Francis's love for animals. I'm just getting this beautiful picture of your mother's living faith. I think we fall apart too as practicing Christians and Catholics when we begin to say, yeah, but what did she believe? The life, the generosity. I'm so moved. At the core of Christianity is hospitality. All these things you're talking about, your family. I really appreciate this. We who maybe are a little more comfortable living within what we call Catholic need to understand that we are not the be all and end all, and we are not the judges, and we need to recognize the true hearts in people of all faiths and degrees of faith. And I'm inspired by your family. I would hope to be as good a practicing Christian as your mother, because she just sounds like an amazing person.
I really appreciate your point of this focus on belief. What do you believe? And it's, we believe all kinds of crap.
Yeah. And then we realize we were wrong later on. You know?
How do we practice our lives? I actually love the phrase practicing Catholic. Because that to me, and I'm a practicing writer, I'm a practicing artist. I'm just practicing all this.
It's true. It's true. And if we did a little more practicing and a little less trying to determine whether other people are in the right part of the spectrum, we would be so much better off. You know? So your mother's been gone since 2008. What would you say was her greatest gift to you personally?
That is such a hard question. You could ask me that 10 times and I'd give you 10 different answers.
Look, give us a few of the things that you feel, or maybe parts of her that you really feel you absorbed that live on in you.
The first thing that is always there is that I am so lucky. I never, ever doubted her love for me and my love for her. We got on wonderfully, and we really had a close relationship ever since I can remember. And I think I am so lucky. As I learned more and more about other families and other family dynamics, I realized that, it doesn't matter how poor we were. And we were poor. She was a single mother of 9, for goodness.
Yeah.
But her love, what a gift she has given me. And certainly, I'm going to start crying.
Yeah.
She died how many years ago?
Yeah.
2008. 18 years ago?
Yeah.
I'm guessing. No, 16 years ago. And it's still the strength of her love is with me every single moment.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. That's life-changing is what that is. One of your images that I saw on your website that I absolutely love, I'm going to show now.
Okay.
This particular image of motherhood.
Yes. This image came out of, I think it was 2 years ago. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I went into the hospital. Of course, one of the first things they do is give you a hysterectomy. And I was 62 at the time. I'd always wanted to have a child, but I couldn't. But there was always this kind of fool's hope. And of course, at 62, I knew I wasn't going to get pregnant, but it became that hysterectomy and this vision of this realization that the hospital just incinerated my womb.
Yeah.
It was gone. It was turned into ash. It went out into the air. And I was coming to terms with that while also just like reliving or remembering my history of wanting to become pregnant. And this picture, I have to admit, the idea of the design is not totally mine. I saw an art card of a Japanese artist probably 30 years ago, and I have not seen that card since. And that card impressed itself on my mind so strongly that I use what I could remember of it to express my sadness of not being a mother myself.
It's so wonderful to be able to talk to the person who brought these ideas and images into the world. So motherhood was not something that would happen for you, but you were blessed with this amazing connection to your own mother. That's a true legacy. I will say, too, that I think mothering is also very narrowly applied. I think it
Yes.
goes back to hospitality. And in our political arena, there's been all this ridiculous talk about who's a mother, who's not. If you're not a mother, you don't have value.
Oh my
Our
goodness.
politicians, you heard all that garbage. But true mothering happens among women taking care of one another and in the hospitality to the world. That is clearly, to me, that's a very feminine energy. I know that Peter Moran was huge in forming the Catholic worker movement with your grandmother, but there's clearly a woman at work when you look at the Catholic worker, that this is about shelter, it's about nurture, it's about feeding. It is traditional women's love in action. And I know that these things are very important to you in your care for people. And we'll talk more about your spiritual direction workshop that you talked to me about. So there's so many ways that we mother the world.
I thank you for putting the Catholic worker in that kind of framework. I've actually never thought about it that way. But and as you were speaking, I thought, yes, this whole thing about what mothering is and what isn't. And I think what it comes down to is an incredible denial of the ability for women to love.
Yeah.
And that denial of the ability, the all-encompassing nature, it is a powerful force. I happen to believe that love is the most powerful force. And it's like a denial of our power to put it in these boxes and say that's the only thing that we're meant to be as mothers. And I can't believe I'm hearing this because I don't buy that at all.
No. In your grandmother's diary, I read where your mother, Tamar, I believe, said to Dorothy one day when Dorothy was taking care of her, she said to Dorothy, and someday when you are a little girl, I will take care of you. Okay. And I loved that so much because then I hear you saying you were able to take care of your mother as she passed. So this is the mothering. This is the legacy. And it doesn't always have to do with childbearing, but we bring it back circularly through the generations and then extending it out into the communities through hospitality. So yes, let's redefine mothering, shall we? We can't read your book or think about your mother or grandmother without thinking about hunger, the legacy of hunger, and what a big part that plays in the story. Wow. My grandmother was a feeder. She ran a restaurant, cooked all the time. But I picked up on this, that in your family, food really is love.
I certainly is very important.
Yeah. As far as if you see somebody who's hungry, you don't say, have a nice day. You make them some soup.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And my mother loved feeding people. She was an excellent gardener. She was an excellent cook. And she taught all of my siblings how to garden and cook, except for me. I know how to garden. though I haven't done it in years, but I don't know how to cook.
Think
My husband does that.
you summed up the charism in what Dorothy said was find community. Share meals with others. It doesn't mean you have to do the cooking. Share meals with others and explain the hope that is in you. I love that saying. In fact, I printed that out, a version of that to use for the community here, because if we would keep it simple like that, we would avoid the pitfalls of theoretical Catholicism.
I think there's a tendency of Catholics to be fascinated with themselves and to really go deep into all of the history, the theology, some of it which is absolutely stunningly beautiful, but it's not that complicated. It's lovely to have a rich culture. It's lovely to have a rich history. It's lovely to have rich thinking. But when it comes down to it, that's not what's important. It's how we treat one another.
And
For our community.
it looks like from the book, for Dorothy and for your mother, it was about being present. Yes, feeding, caring for people, but also listening was such a big part. And that was not easy. I'm blown away sometimes by how your grandmother would write about how terrified she was sometimes of these people that she was taking care of, because some of them were very mentally ill. And yet she had this practice of being so kind and listening and just accepting them where they were. It's just so practical. And so beautiful.
Yeah, she was a genius at that. She really was. She was very good at drawing people's stories out of them. So many people who come to the worker are, as you say, very damaged and not really prone to sharing their experiences with others. But my grandmother was so good at drawing out their stories because she was genuinely interested. She really wanted to hear what they had to say, and they responded. They responded to that. My mother was the same way, too.
What better form of Christian love to bring to the world? This has been a great talk about your mother and grandmother and the legacy that they gave you, which was very dynamic and very creative. So that legacy has come down through you as both writing and visual arts, and I would love to hear more about that.
Well, another one of the great gifts that my mother gave me was that she always had a project. So she was a weaver and a spinner. She was a gardener. She was always making things. She was always learning things. We had a tremendous number of books in our house. We had thousands of books, I would say. And so I grew up with this sense, as did my siblings too, that there was always something to do. There was always something to make. There's always something to learn. There's always something to create. And I don't feel complete unless I have a project that I'm working on. And so there's 3 areas of creativity that I've been drawn to: writing, and that was introduced to me by my grandmother, watching her sit at her typewriter. She was an excellent typist, very quick, pound out her articles at her column. And that really started me as a writer. And then I also became a musician. I was a flute player and did a few gigs, earned a bit of money at it. I had to stop that because of a hand injury. And then just recently, I have landed on the visual arts. And it's not that it's come out of nowhere. I've actually been very much attracted and doing art since I was a child. The interesting thing about art for me is that I can't separate art from the Catholic worker. I can't separate it from my faith. I can't separate it from how I view the world. I grew up on the artwork of fabulous people that I knew because my grandmother loved art. She was very much interested in literature, arts, and music. She always made time for those 3 things. And so at the Catholic worker, there's a history of some excellent artists. And I grew up with their art. I grew up with Fritz Eichenberg's woodcuts, particularly his illustrations of Jane Eyre and War and Peace and Wuthering Heights. And his artwork isn't really for children, but I loved it as a child. I thought it was just perfect. And of course, Sister Carita Kent, grew up with her art. Rita Corbin, another one of the Catholic worker artists. She was a dear friend of my mother, and they both were raising families at the same time. So I grew up with Rita's children. So there's just been this thread of art and artists, knowing artists personally in my life. And I felt, I don't know why, I made this very silly decision when I was younger. I thought I had to choose one of these. I couldn't be a writer and a musician and an artist. I had to choose one. And if there's anything I wish I could do differently in my life is to go back to that 21-year-old or 20-year-old after about the things and say, do it all. But anyway, here I am. The divine moment is the present moment. So a few years back, actually was during a pandemic, like what happened with many people. Lockdown was quite severe here in Ireland. And so I had all these art supplies that I've been gathering for years. Don't ask me why, but there they were. I was like, oh God, I have all this paint. I have this canvas. I have this paper. Let me do something. Yeah. And so I really just threw myself into doing art. And Kelly, I cannot describe to you what a change it has brought to my life. It really has. It has brought me alive in a way. I love writing, and I'll always write. I write every day. I'm probably more faithful as a writer than I am as a visual artist. Because I do have that habit, a decades-long habit of writing every single morning. So I will never lose that. But there's something about the visual arts that just, all these things, it's like, for example, going back to the Madonna and Child that I painted, coming out of an experience that, sure, I can explain how I felt, but people look at that, people say to me, I see that love between mother and child that's just so intense. And I'm like, yes, that's what you can do with the visual arts that you can't necessarily do with writing. It's a totally different part of one's awareness and being and perception. And also, I just love color.
I agree with you. I love that image. I have some others of yours here. Of course, this one, you said something about woodcuts. Is this a woodcut?
It's a lino.
Okay, thank you.
I've always loved, I think because of Fritz Eigenberg, I've always loved woodcuts. And I, as a teenager, I would do lino cuts, and I really enjoyed them. They're not easy because you have to work backwards.
Yes.
You have to design backwards. But there's something about prints. I love printing. I love the organicness of woodcuts and lino prints. In the wake of my book being published, I did a lot of talks about the book. Traveled all over the U.S., into Canada for a year and a half. I spoke to an incredible number of people, venues from universities to parishes to bookstores to high schools. And as I was speaking, after a certain amount of time, you get tired of hearing the sound of your own voice. And so I was trying to figure out what's the next step for me, rather than just again and again talk about what was in the book. What could I give that was in addition to the book to people? And I realized that what was forming in me was a series of lessons that I had learned from my grandmother. And I refined them, and it came down to these, what I landed on calling provocations. It was the only word I could think of that really suited how I felt about what she was teaching me. Yes. And so I then wrote a series of 10 articles, actually, for the London Tablet, each one discussing one of these provocations. And of course, I have to do art in addition to writing. And so I thought, I'm going to do a poster, a print. And from that idea, then the idea for Lionel Cup came from that. So these are the 9 provocations of Dorothy Day there on this print.
Yes. As you know, I love this print. It is now on my wall.
Thank you.
I highly recommend it. But it's amazing. And I think the beauty is that you did distill out the very provocative elements of her life and her message. So I do really love that. Some of your work just makes me happy, like your teapot series. And here's one. And they're just, tell me about the teapots. So where do those come from in you?
I'm a tea drinker. If you haven't heard, if you haven't been able to see,
and you're in Ireland, so I think
that's one of the reasons why I love Ireland. She understands me.
You found your people.
I found my people. The U.S. does not know how to make a good cup of tea.
Okay, but the teapots.
I was just, this was either in the pandemic or when I was ill. I can't remember when I was doing these series, but I couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I was just looking around at what was in the cottage that I had loved. And of course, being a tea drinker, I have teapots around, and there was this one particular teapot, and I was like looking at it and I was like, well, I really like that shape. And basically I done a series of, this is a layered project of model printing, stenciling, and painting. And then the final step actually is digital art. I scan it and I do some kind of effects digitally.
Yes.
So I did a series of that were of this one particular teapot.
And here's the blue one. I think there are two blue ones, actually. Are there not?
Yes, there are two
And
blue
then
ones.
this was. Yeah. I had David Hayward on the show, Naked Pastor, and he complained to me a little bit. He says, I can't explain my art. And I understand, as a person who has created visual arts, I understand the terrible thing I'm asking people to do. I guess I do like to hear about process. I do like to hear about what led you to create this. I'm not going to ask you to explain any symbolism of the teapot or anything, because that's
No, it's just a joy
that
of
teapot.
it's a teapot, and it's a joy of a teapot. It's taking delight in the teapot.
It is.
But it's a beautiful shape.
It
Teapots are
is.
beautiful shapes.
It's, I said, it just makes me happy. You also did some really lovely flowers, and I have a couple of those that I would like to share with people. And were these also during the pandemic?
No, these were last winter, actually.
Oh.
And winters in Ireland are very dark. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, it's so dark. How can I lighten my mood? And I thought, flowers, let's make some flowers. So I just spent a month making flowers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the textures. I have to say, you mentioned that you do some of that digitally, and I think it's wonderful how there's a textile feeling that creeps in. But it's really lovely. And here's another one that I love.
Oh, I love the poppies.
Yes.
I
Again,
love the poppies.
they just make me very happy. So thank you for those.
Yeah, I call that series Flowers of Good Cheer. So I'm glad they make you.
Yeah, they do. They do. And I may need some of those to get me through the winter too. I'm the kind of person that I have flowers out on my patio because I don't have a garden. And when it starts getting cold and wintry, I bring all of the pots inside and I engage in this struggle to keep them alive as long as possibly. Of course, it's a losing battle, but that's how powerful flowers are.
Take your pinks out.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, I'm like you. I have stockpiled art supplies. I have to get through seminary first. I'm afraid the visual is having to just wait there in the bins for now, but absolutely. Yeah, I have art supplies. Oh my. All right. This is wonderful. Now, I'd like to have us talk about your spiritual retreats that you're going to begin in December. And now these are in Ireland, correct?
This one is in Ireland. Next one that's coming up. That's the first one. This is a brand new venture.
All right.
It came out of the retreat is called Spiritual Hunger and the Artistic Spirit. And it came out of a couple of months ago. I did this series. I made this, what I call a spiritual accordion.
I have a picture. I'm going to show some pictures of this because I was fascinated by this. All right.
Yes. So what in this is it's a series of 84 size pages. I have done very much the same process. I do a lot of model printing on a gel plate. I do a lot of painting. I do stenciling. I do layering, layers and layers. And what happened with this is that I realized as I explore my spiritual path, which I, truthfully speaking, do not recognize in other people so far yet. And yet I know that I do share this with many people. But what I'm discovering is that I'm having to find my own language. I'm having to find my own spiritual language. I'm having to find a way of being spiritually true to myself without being a hypocrite. And unfortunately, I battle a lot with my Catholic background because I don't know how to navigate being a Catholic, or I don't know how to navigate that with also being authentic and true to myself. So what this accordion, these just sheets of paper that I glue together so you could open it out into an accordion and you can, it's 34 pages total. And what I've done is just collected poetry that I've written, sayings that have meant a huge amount to me in my life, and important moments, particularly more recently, that have come to me coming out of my illness. I mentioned my ovarian cancer. Now, I don't know if some of these images that I've been thinking of working on and are coming, this spiritual accordion is the first draft of many ideas I have. But I have these images that are just dying to come out. And I always laugh at myself when I talk about these images because they came when I was totally morphine ridden as the hospital. I think, whatever the morphine did to me, it really opened up my perception in a way. And so the spiritual accordion it has basically two, what's the word I want? Meanings or levels or quests, how to define and express my own spirituality, and also how to not only to express it to myself, but to express it to other people. And I really want to do this both, of course, in writing, but also in my art with these images that I'm seeing in my mind's eye. So that's what I was doing. And then as I was speaking to my friends about this and showing them what I was working on, people are saying, "Oh my God, this is a wonderful tool. How did you do this? How can I do this?" And I thought, I'll be happy to teach people. I love teaching people. So the idea of a workshop came in which we'll do exactly what I have just done, which is gather our life experiences or our lessons or the things that have stuck with us that we can't let go of, no matter if they happened 50 years ago or 55 years ago or yesterday, and bring it into a form of our own spiritual language, our own spiritual being, who we are in as authentic and clear a way as we possibly can. So that's what the workshop is hopefully going to do.
That's amazing.
My husband and I are living on the grounds of a Capuchin friary in Donegal, and they do a lot of retreats. And so I've booked in to do my first retreat here, my first workshop here. And I originally thought 5 days, and I will return to the 5 day workshop. But because this was the first one, and because it was right before Christmas, and we're in Donegal, which is really the end of nowhere, it really is isolated.
Yeah.
And it's hard to bring people here. So I thought it would be hard to bring people for 5 days. And if I cut it down to 3 days, it would be more Irish people would be inclined to come. So that's why that is. So this first one is really an experiment, but I am planning to do one in the States. I'm working on where and how, and that would be a 5 day retreat. Because I think it takes a while to really dig deep into these questions.
Couple thoughts came to me as you were talking. First of all, I don't think there's anything wrong with morphine facilitating insight. It happened. There it is. We'll say the word facilitate. Actually, some of my deepest and most insightful understandings of myself and my spirituality often came as I was coming out of surgery. Or because I think it has to do with our inhibitions and our set ways of thinking and of how we think we should be thinking about things. And to interrupt that with art as well, I'm really excited about that you're doing this. As a Catholic myself, my struggle as a Catholic has been intense. That whole not being a hypocrite, finding a way to be authentic in my faith is huge. And although I love liturgy, I think as Catholics, we also need to bless each other and say, look, there are other ways to go into your spirit and bring out what is true and what is good. And I'm so excited about this workshop. I may have to sell something so that I can attend when you come to the States. Because I need that. I was a visual artist for many years. And I went to art school and I got completely shut down by the men there because I wasn't producing the sort of art they wanted. And so to reclaim that, and I think there are a lot of people like that thinking, oh, I'm not an artist. Yes, you are some kind of artist.
Absolutely.
And this is the kind of quest that I think would reclaim not just creativity for people, but also that spiritual authenticity. So forgive me for talking so much about it, but I get very excited because I think we as Catholics need things like this to find our true faith, to reclaim that after what so many of us have gone through. So yay, you. And we will put some information about that at the end. I will add that on. For now, I would like to point people to your website where they can find these beautiful images. I highly recommend The World Will Be Saved by Beauty. It's amazing. A very real and beautiful story of a very real and beautiful family. I will always have it among my favorites. So yes, your website, would you please say and spell that out for folks?
It is Bridget's Cloak Art. BRIGITSCLOAKARTS.com.
And it's a great site. It's where you can see and order these lovely images, her visual artworks. So this has been fantastic. I love visiting with you. I hope we can someday do it again. I'd love it if you could just wrap up our interview, Kate, with any parting thought that you would like to leave for our audience.
Of putting me on the spot, Kelly.
Well, I loved your advice earlier, and maybe you want to spin off of this about what you would have said to the 21-year-old you about do it all.
Do it all. Do it all. I don't want to feed in the sense of doom and gloom and despair and urgency, but I do feel an incredible amount of urgency given the times that we live in now. And I think what keeps coming back to me is the message of hope. And I know hope is kind of gotten a bad rap, but I am ultimately a really hopeful person. I can't help myself. Yep, I'm hopeful. And this is one of the big lessons that I've learned from my grandmother and mother is that you could always do something. And so much of what society may tell you is not meaningful. It's just not true. So much of what we're taught as women just isn't true. So much of what we taught that is valuable, this isn't true. I think the most important thing that we can do is to find our authentic voice, find our own language, speak for ourselves, express, and then never forget to be hospitable.
Thank you so much. That is a great parting thought. I, with you, believe that if we attend to people with hospitality and love, the great things can still happen. So thank you, Kate. I will have that information up at the end of the video for everyone so they can learn more about you and your wonderful legacy. So thank you to all of you who came today, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Join Kate Hennessy for the first Spiritual Hunger and the Artistic Soul Workshop retreat that she described in our interview today, December 13th to 15, 2024 in Ireland at Arts Capuchin Friary. Email the Friary at info@rdsfriary.ie. People of all levels of art making, from absolute beginner to the confident, are welcome, as are people of all faiths or none. Feed that spiritual hunger in an unforgettable retreat. Mad Catholic is sustained by the grace of God and the communion of saints. Say your prayers, kids, and until next time, give heartfelt thanks to God.